Cool. Looks like we are live. Hey Tom, how are you doing, mate? You alright?
I'm very well, thanks, mate.
Good
Yeah, we're just
stuff.
saying off camera, weren't we? We've kind of followed each other for like a
For
decent
ages.
while now. We've messaged a few times about different stuff, so it's yeah, good to finally put a voice to
To a Twitter profile, if we're
to a
gonna
Twitter
call it
profile.
that.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, it's great, man. Thanks again for making the time. I know we literally spoke. I think it was like, well, partly yesterday, partly most of today to get this sorted for right now. So appreciate you being like so quick with your time and things as well. But like I said, I'm just really interested to find out a lot more about kind of what you've been up to, really. So I've been getting into writing a little bit myself. I know that you're massive into that too. And what I have noticed that, and I hope a lot of people find out more about it from this, is that you've written a book that's coming out. Is it July 18th? Am I right in saying that? Cool. So, I mean, we'll get into that 100% towards the end. We'll have some quick fires as well about that. So, I'll try and keep you on your toes a little bit towards the end. But I just kind of want to find out a bit more about yourself, really. So, first thing I'd love to ask anyone who's into writing is, have you always wanted to get into writing, or kind of where did that bug come from originally?
Yeah, so I've always been into writing. So when I was like my first football tournament I remember was Euro 2004. So
Right, yeah.
I'd been five then.
Was that
And
Greece? That was
that was
Greece
the
one.
Greece, yeah, Greece, and then that was what made me kind of start to want to play youth football, and I played youth football until I was about 17. And when I was one of my like most vivid memories is of being 9 or 10 years old, playing a match, and then coming home and typing up match notes on like Note, and then
Really?
like drawing out like a square blank in the page, and then I'd do like a drawing from the match. That was always like I was okay. I wasn't particularly I wasn't bad. I wasn't particularly great at football, but it was the writing and the telling people. I always used to. It sounds so cliched, but that was what I always like loved doing, is telling people about football at any
Yeah.
level. And yeah, I was always had a knack for English, and all through school, English was like my strongest. Like I absolutely like head and shoulders clear of everything else almost.
Right.
And then I got to college and fell a little bit out of love with writing, I'd say, and I learned more towards sciences, and particularly like human sciences. So I went on to do a degree at the University of Plymouth in human geography.
Yeah.
So not your geography split into two types. You can have your physical geography, so that's like your rivers and landforms and your volcanoes, all that sort of stuff. And then you have your human geography, which is almost more like you can put any subject you want into it, and you can use this prism of human geography to take anything away from it. So that could be politics, could be finance, could be sport. You know, looking at how people congregate in space to watch football, to consume sport, music festivals, and I loved it. Absolutely loved that. But then about on my end of my second year, I think as a lot of people who go to university would resonate with, had a bit of a kind of an epiphany, a bit of a crisis of kind of confidence, where I was like, oh god, I'm not far away from finishing, and I don't know what I want to do. Like geography isn't one of those. It's not a subject where there's a clear path after it. There's not like you don't become a geographer. You can take those skills and you can become, go into finance and banking or teaching, but there's not it's great because it's really open, but equally it can be quite daunting because you're like, there's no one path ahead for me. And I was at the pub with my best friend, and we were just talking about literally been talking about football for hours and hours, and then I had this conversation about this crisis of confidence. We're like, well, we've kind of answered your question here. We've been talking about football for 2 hours, and football in depth. Like, we're not just like really talking about like football.
Yeah.
It's like, why don't you kind of go back to writing but do it about football? And from then on, I started writing my own stuff to put on. I just kept on Word and didn't show anyone. I was really kind of
Really?
shy and didn't want to. I showed it to my family and to my best friend who kind of had that conversation with. I shared it with him, but no one else. And then COVID happened, and came home from uni in my last year, and just thought basically, sod it, I'm gonna make my own blog, and started my own just simple WordPress blog, doing a few bits, and then did a bit of kind of volunteer writing for a few slightly bigger sites, people with like a couple hundred, couple of thousand followers. And then after that, I just co-founded an amazing website with two friends of mine called First Time Finish, which absolutely kind of taught me a lot about writing and writing in different ways. I've just realised I've been rambling. I've probably answered a few questions in one because I've just gone off on these. In short, I've always loved writing about football in all of its forms, and to be able to kind of have this physical thing coming out is like a huge like kind of a piece of physical validation for the I suppose years as long as I can remember of being interested in that sort of thing.
One thing you said really resonated with me about not knowing what to do when you graduate. I don't think anyone knows what to do when they graduate, and I think you said even when you do geography you don't become a geographer. You're right, but I, for example, did law, and technically, there is a lawyer, that is a thing, but I think my crisis of confidence sort of came on my first day. I don't know when you realise that it wasn't going to take you where you wanted it to be, but mine was literally my very first lecture because I thought you did law and you become a lawyer, that I didn't piece together the whole, you have to do training, you have to do LPC, a contract and all that. This woman told me about, you have to do like 5 extra years of this, 4 extra years of that, and only then will you be able to do more work as a lawyer. And I was like, you know what, some people are cut out for it, I'm not one of them. And I think it's only since, I think COVID was a massive like eye-opener for a lot of people, because at least from my point of view, it's, you got to start doing what you like because the world can decide it wants to go a different way. And you mentioned starting that blog, and it's funny how I wouldn't have painted you out to be a shy person. I know we haven't spoken that much, but from your post either on Twitter or everything, you have to have some kind of confidence in what you say in order to put it out there, whether rightly or wrongly. So when you did create that first blog, do you remember when you did it, and do you remember how you felt putting that first blog up? Like, that must have been a real kind of like stepping stone for you. And do you look back on that moment with a lot of thinking that where you are now might not have happened had you not have done that?
Oh, 100%. Like, I could easily have taught myself out of it, and I did talk myself out of it many times. Like, I am once I get my teeth into something and I get a footing and I start to feel confident in what I'm doing, I kind of lose that shyness. But if it's something into the unknown and putting yourself out there, I think it's it's often a generational thing as well, in terms of like, that you're putting something out there for lots of people, like obviously lots of people to see and critique, and that can tear you down before you even started. Like, that's quite scary. And I just put up a simple WordPress site, and I'd written tens of these articles, and I'd refined and I'd sent off to people, and I'd had some really good feedback from some of the guys from Football Daily I'd reached out to, and they'd got back to me and they'd give me some really good feedback, and I've picked the two that I like the best. And that was, one was about Christopher Nkunku, who was just having his first breakthrough season at RB Leipzig, and then the second one, this kind of shows the timestamp on it, was when there was the big debate of who was going to be the third member of England's midfield at the Euros. It was going to be Rice, Henderson, who was the other one. It was going to be Maddison or Grealish, but I proposed Oxlade-Chamberlain at the time, and they were like they were the two articles that I went with. And I just got all my family and friends to share it on Facebook and Twitter, and I only had tiny Twitter following at the time, so like actually sharing it with Facebook actually turned out to be probably quite a good way to do it, because there's just naturally hundreds of people on there who, even if they're not interested in football, they know you, so they're like, I'll give that a share, I'll give that a like, and you start to people start to become a little bit impressed just by the fact that you've put yourself out there, rather than necessarily the quality of what you're doing. But like, if I hadn't done that, I could easily have taught myself out of it, and I could have after in the 2021 I did a master's. I went back to uni when kind of uni's opened back up. I did a master's at a different university in Plymouth, University of Marjon Plymouth, in research journalism, and I kind of geared that towards sports journalism. So I would literally, that every single choice I've made thereafter has gone back to me just taking that plunge and just being like you say, use this lockdown. Like, you know, if you get this wrong, there's not going to be people in the street pointing and laughing at you because nobody's out in the street. So as long as you can,
that's a good point.
You know, like you're as sheltered and protected as you're ever gonna be. So just go for it and do it. And I'll say I'm glad I did it is like a understatement. Yeah.
What would be? I mean, there are people who allow that shyness to sort of overcome them a little bit, no matter how kind of I don't know, let's say talented they are, whether naturally or created. So there's never going to be a straight answer to overcoming shyness or to overcome, the fear of putting yourself out there. But what you've mentioned there is doing it in small, manageable steps so that it doesn't become this sort of daunting task. So let's say you are, I don't know, let's put you in a world where you didn't put that blog out there, or you didn't put any of your work out to anybody else. You still had your socials, you still had all of that, and you just had an idea. Is there anything that you would do differently, considering how the world has evolved since then, in order to break into the new media world? Or do you think that your method of just putting yourself out there and hope and seeing what happens with your personal network is the best way to go about it?
It's hard to say. It's a very good question. Because it's only really been two years. Like, it's happened incredibly quick. So I'm very happy with where I've got to, and I don't look at any stage along the way of being like, oh, that was a misstep, or that was learning from a mistake. I've been very fortunate in that everything I've seemed to have flung at the wall has stuck.
Yeah.
And some that can just be luck. Like, that can literally, if that day when I launched that blog, people hadn't shared it, I could have had a real crisis of confidence and thought, nah, this isn't for me. People aren't going to be interested, or I'm not as good as I thought I was, but clearly people don't get what I'm trying to do. So I think there's huge amounts of luck in it, but you do kind of make your own luck. And I think the first thing you have to do is you just got to have a go and just not have regrets about stuff. Because like, I would have been someone who would have been very nervous about it, and then might have looked back in 2 years' time and thought like, oh, what if I'd just given that a go, or what if I'd, tried that. Well, one thing I maybe think, I mean, I'm definitely, like, when it comes to media, writing is what I like do and I'm best at. I've done a bit of podcasting. I feel like I've got better at that. But I look at some people who are doing multiple different types of media. So like, someone I know quite well is people might know the Euro expert on Twitter, who makes these amazing short tactical videos. He's gone straight in with doing video format on TikTok, and that is just a sign of how a different way of doing it rather than a traditional going in with a writing background. And I've read his writing as well, and it's excellent, and it's really impressive to see. So it'd be interesting to know if I'd maybe been a bit more assured of myself, kind of personally, whether I would have had a crack at video format. But to be honest, I would have had no grounds to do so, just because writing is something, it's always been the writing for me, rather than wanting to, I want to be involved in football, let's try all these different ways of doing it. It was always, I want to be a writer. And then any other way could perhaps supplement it, I suppose.
Okay, no, that's fair. And because that's why I look at kind of the way the media is going at the minute, or in terms of like what people are consuming most of all, and it's kind of beginning to not alienate people, but it is sort of drafting up the barriers to entry a little bit more, because I go on like LinkedIn or Twitter are probably my two main platforms, right? And I constantly see, oh, static imagery is dead, no more pictures, you got to get videos, or like, you got to be engaging, and people aren't just going to sit there and read your stuff. Like, you got to do more, you got to do TikTok, you got to do all this sort of stuff. So I think people do need to sort of sit back and realize that actually it's traditional media for a reason. Everything is a tradition for a reason, and there are still people who buy into that. Like, I'm only 25, but I'll sit there with a book over watching a film any day, and there are millions of people who agree in that same way. So I think people need to understand that a bit more. And you mentioned luck, and I'm quite glad you brought that up, to be fair, because I find that luck is a bit of a double-edged sword in a way, because there's always an element to it. In any form of success, I think there's always an element of luck involved. And like you say, someone either... So for example, this chat, you responding to this message to do this is an element of luck in it. Obviously, I'm happy you're here. I'm glad you want to do it, but there's always that element of it. And similarly, the people clicking on your link or the guys from Football Daily coming back to your message to them is also that element of luck in there. But I find that although the luck gets you through the door, it doesn't sustain your thought process if you feel like you don't deserve to be there. So this comes in the form of imposter syndrome, which everyone seems to talk about. And you know, you've done it incredibly well. I'm actually like, I admire your work quite a lot. And I think, do you ever feel imposter syndrome at any point? Like, because I don't know about you, but when I wrote my first book and people were actually giving me a good response to it, I just thought, I remember having days thinking, I'm not an author, what the hell are they talking to me for? So do you ever feel that whenever you get that tinge of success, and do you know where that sort of stems from?
Absolutely massively. Like I've said it on a few podcasts when talking about this book, particularly since submitting it on, so I submitted it on the 31st of March, so it's been like, looking at the 2.5 months between it being submitted and it being published. That's a long time for me to have sat and stewed and thought like, oh God, like, what if, you know, you kind of, you forget bits that you've written and you almost make up bits in your head that you have written, and you hear something on another podcast or someone say something about a player and you're like, oh, did I include that? Or maybe I got that wrong about it. It's really difficult. And it was particularly hard between submitting it and before me getting the first copy. It was really quite like anxious. Like I'm quite an anxious person anyway, but the thought of like people, is that when you write an article online, it can kind of be, unless it kind of blows Twitter open for whatever reason, you kind of operate a bit within an echo chamber, because generally it'll be your followers or people who are clicking to read, and ultimately if they like it or they don't like it, you don't necessarily feel like it's entirely on them to make that decision of whether to click on it or not. With a book, people are parting with their money before it's even come out. It will arrive weeks after they've bought it, and then if it arrives and it's kind of hinging on what you hope it to be, and even what they hope it to be, that's quite anxiety inducing for me. And it was really starting to not ruin the process, but it did make me I did have a few sleepless nights, and then the first copy arrived through the post and I got it in my hand. And I was like, do you know what? I'm here now. I don't. It's not that I don't care, but I'm like, this is. You just needed that bit physical to have it in your. I'm sure you felt the same when you had that first one in your hand. You're like, okay, I take a step back and be happy that you've got a copy of your own book in your hand, and then if people love it, then great. And I've had so many people come to me and say that they're looking forward to this book, which is amazing. It does bring its own pressure as well, but you just gotta. You've got to see it as good pressure, because like there's a reason that people are excited for it. It's because there's not that much literature on this club or on Serie A in general in English at the moment. Like the snobbery from the English media towards European football is an absolute worst. And and to be able to show people that English writers do care about European football is important. And from people that I've spoke to from Italy, they really appreciate that, and that does bring its own pressure. And imposter syndrome is the perfect like name for it. And I feel like every time you get to like a checkpoint, that imposter syndrome it just moves on to something else. So you get your first article published, and people react well to it, and that imposter syndrome dies down. You're like, okay, I kind of belong to this. Then you pitch to another website that's a bit bigger, and then again, imposter syndrome, but people receive it well, and you kind of scale it up and you just got to be prepared that you're going to feel like that, because you're going to be conscientious, because you care about your work. You're always going to have that, and you care what people think. And the best thing to do is just to not let it ruin the journey. Really, just it's okay to feel like you don't belong necessarily in that sphere, because it's because you have an admiration for so many other people there. But just don't let it ruin it. Just be okay. Just be okay with feeling like you're very lucky to be there. Lucky in like a fortunate way.
Yeah, and you're right. I think, I don't know about you, but when I got my first book, I was scared. Is that a dumb word? I don't know. I was really, I just thought because now I had this thing. It was like a kid. It literally took me I don't know how long it took you. It took me 9 months to make this thing. I remember just staring at it, and I just thought people could rip this thing to shreds. That was my very first thought. I didn't think, oh, that's cool, that's amazing, that's this. I was fanning through the pages, and I was just looking at some of the stuff I'd remember right, and I just thought people could literally say whatever they want and rip it to shreds without any care about the 9 months that I just put into it. And that scared the crap out of me. And then when I got my first review and it was positive, it still didn't get rid of it. I still even now I check the Amazon listing periodically to see what people are saying about it. But then I think I just had a moment where, I don't know, either someone said it to me or I just thought it, and I was just like, you know what, not many people are capable of doing what I just did. And I don't think it's arrogance either. I just think it's a case of knowing how much you're actually worth and knowing the value of what you've done, because I probably spent so long bringing down the value of who I was and what I did because I was so scared of what other people thought. And then when I actually thought, actually, I don't care what they think necessarily, I've done something good. I feel like people need to prioritize that a lot more. And doing a book is one way of doing it, I guess, in the article or the writing world. But another way that people have been doing it lately that I've seen is creating blogs and doing articles and things. And First Time Finish, I'll be leaving links to it in the description. It's one of my favorite websites, honestly, because it's easy to use. It's got a lot of insight. You always seem to get like guests like on to either talk about a player and things like that. So could you take me back to how it started and kind of whose idea it was? And also I might want to do a little kind of rudimentary understanding of how you actually make a blog, because I watched like too many videos and I heard too many things of people who kept bloating it and making it sound a lot more sort of I don't know, like harder than it actually is or more complex than it is. So could you take me back to the day of when you actually thought with your friends? I know it was like a joint enterprise, right? It was you and a couple of others. So could you take me back to when you actually started it and why you started it?
So it was July 2020, might have even been the start of August 2020, and I had a message from a guy called Ben, who I'd never met before, never spoke to in my life. I'd followed him for a little bit, but never in it. And he messaged me saying, like, "Hi Tom, I've read some of your work that you've written for these websites, and I don't just like what you've written about. There's something about the style that reminds me of myself. I'm looking at making a website for hitting like football culture website that I want to grow from the ground up and feel has real potential to hit loads of different areas in football journalism. Would you be interested?" And he attached the email. Ben sent me he'd already put together a brief, a PowerPoint, including loads of these graphic designs he'd done. Ben's not a graphic designer, he's a writer, but he'd learned how to do these graphic designs, just basic Photoshop stuff, but just it was stylized from the word go. It wasn't, and I was really impressed by it. And then we had a Zoom meeting, me and Ben, and hit it off immediately. I was like had about a 3-hour Zoom meeting just talking about football, because obviously it was during COVID when football been like just the project restart just happened, and just glad to have football back. And we were just like kind of just it was like we'd known each other ages. And then he introduced me to Ninad, who is the third member, who again never met before, and Ben and Ninad had met about a couple of weeks before they had the idea, and we just started putting together this WordPress site. Ben started all that off, and the quality of the website, which a lot of people have commented on, that does come with a cost. Like we paid for like a business package of WordPress site, because we wanted to go in not at the ground level. We wanted to go in and impress people from the word go, and we just built up this bank of articles. And I'd only ever written about football tactics before. I'd never done about culture or stuff, but straight away from the word go, we had the idea of we need to do things that you'd find on The Athletic, but we're going to find a way to do it. And straight away Ben managed to get a contact of Alphonso Davis's his first coach back in Canada, and it just so happened that he was speaking to him a week before the Champions League final against PSG.
Yeah.
So we released this article a week before all the others as like a teaser, and it absolutely like exploded because it was like that was Alphonso Davies's tournament. That was the one that he blitzed Chelsea, and he just came out of nowhere. And again, kind of what you say, not luck, but the timing was just perfect. It just couldn't have gone any better. And Ben had these incredible interviews with Raheem Sterling's school teacher, with Erling Haaland's the first scout that discovered him. And I was like, oh my God, I don't know how to get these contacts. And then through talking and getting to know these guys, like we kind of found ways to get hold of these people. And the breakthrough for me was I got a hold of the Marcus Thuram's first coach, so Lilian Thuram's son. From his academy when he was in France, and I remember I was so nervous. I was literally like this guy couldn't speak very good English. It was like kind of broken WhatsApp messages, and really, really nervous, and just trying to ask these questions. And then he came back, and then one of the things he rather than me ask questions, he just decided to tell me all he knew, because it was easier for him to do rather than try and understand my questions. And he told an anecdote about Marcus Thuram wearing the boots that Lilian Thuram wore in the World Cup semi-final against 2006. So that'd been Brazil. I remember France. Marcus Thuram wore those very boots to training when he was 12 years old, and they actually fit him. That's how big Marcus is. Like he's a huge boy. And as soon as I heard that, I was like, oh wow, this is what it's about. This is like hearing that anecdote was just like this huge, like almost like release of I kind of got it. And then from then on, I was just hungry to kind of find these interviews and find these coaches. And at the end, we kind of didn't want to find them. We weren't fussed about talking to the players themselves. It was about the people who made them. That was the big thing all along. And we've done some incredible ones. Like Ben did an article about a North Korean player who signed for Juventus, but he wasn't he couldn't get the permits to go and leave North Korea, and people started to think it was a means of funding the North Korean regime, and it turned really murky. And we're pretty much the only site that even told that story, and the Sun have gone on to use our story to tell their own. It was just the biggest compliment like ever to have that sort of stuff. And naturally the past year we've kind of the website didn't pay, like it's you can't get paid from a website from the word go, it's just not possible. So in the past year we've kind of had to look at a few other priorities. Like we've all got our own jobs within football. Ninad's doing a master's degree in sports journalism, so we have had to kind of prioritize other things. But this at the moment, this portfolio of work that we'll always have, and we hope that we'll get to add to one day, was so proud of it. And I'm just glad people like yourself enjoy it so much.
I had no idea you didn't know each other before. I just assumed that, like, I just saw your three names attached to each other, either on LinkedIn or Twitter. I was like, they have to know each other. But you know, when you make that story about Marcus Thuram, and you're talking to people who are really closely connected with these guys, I always find that football media, like, they tend to talk about these people. I've been guilty of it, if I'm honest, where you talk about these people knowing that you don't know them, and you can kind of say what you want. It's your opinion, but you can kind of say what you want. But do you find that gives you a kind of a sense of responsibility? Like, you're talking to the guy who helped coach this guy, or you're talking to the father of this person, the associate of that person, where do you find a sense of responsibility towards them to represent them in the right way? And does that, if we talk about imposter syndrome and things like that before, does that make you fill you with a bit more trepidation before you click post on anything? Or do you already take that view of, this person give me their time, I'm going to reward it by doing things properly?
I think the first thing is that you feel very like thankful that they're going to give their time. Like a lot of the time, I would often, when I reach out to these people, I'd say, if you want me to send these questions by email, I'm more than happy to do so, because I understand you're busy. And in a way, that would almost be, you wouldn't get the same depth of answer, but it'd almost be a little bit easier for, particularly if you're like speaking to people who don't have English as their first language, if you can do it by email. And ultimately, like, if you're in a busy schedule, if someone could just ping an email back over to you, it is like less time consuming than than a spoken interview, I would always get incredibly nervous. Like my favourite interview I ever did was with Neil Banfield, who was Arsene Wenger's first team coach from 97 to 2017 till Wenger left.
Jeez.
He was his number. He was Steve Bold was his number 2.
Yep.
And then Neil Banfield was the one kind of below that.
Right.
And one thing I'm really proud about that article is that he's had a few people have interviewed him a lot because he worked with Bergkamp and he worked with Perez and he worked with Henry, but he was very surprised. I wanted to ask him about the academy products of the 2010s who'd got away. So there's like a raft of players who all played together. So there was Serge Gnabry, Doniel Marlin, Jeff Rennie Adelaide, Joshua Da Silva, who's at Brentford now, and Ismael Benacer, who's obviously at Milan now.
Yep.
And I was fascinated by these players because they've all gone on to do amazing things. And I just wanted to hear whether there was anything that bound them together. And he really appreciated that. He's an amazing bloke, and he would have happily talked to death about Henry and Bergkamp, but I was asking him something a bit different to what he was used to.
Yeah.
And I feel like that kind of summed up what we were trying to do the whole time is tell something that was slightly different. And a lot of football sites will say we're telling the untold corners of the game or away from the mainstream, but I really, really did feel like we did that. And even when we did cover mainstream areas, we seemed to do it in a way that people just like really enjoyed. Like our Euro 2020 preview. Yeah. At one point, if you search Guide to Euro 2020 on Google, we were the 3rd highest on Google. We were above Jose Mourinho's one with the Sun. Like, we were above the Athletics. I don't mean that to be like braggy, but it was for 3 guys who had never met each other. We've only met each other once, and that was in November. Like, we'd never met before, and we just managed to kind of somehow just find a niche within football analytics, particularly on Twitter, that people loved. And that was like, we're all incredibly proud of that we managed to cotton on to that so quickly. And it's so gratifying to hear people like say how much they have enjoyed the stuff, and a lot of it is timeless. So even if we're not uploading super regularly, people can go back and read these inside stories, because it doesn't matter where these players are now. It's still, their story remains the same of when they were youth players, for example.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's not reactive. I mean, the Euro one would be, I guess, the most reactive. But then either way, I sometimes go back and read stuff on the World Cup 06 or like the World Cup 2010. So there's going to be people, especially at the Euros, the one that just happened is one of the ones that for English fans will stand out, obviously, but for most fans will stand out for loads of different reasons. And I think one thing I've learned is you need a niche to sort of stand out and to move forward in the football world, because it is so saturated. And that brings me on kind of nicely to your book. So with your book, I have to admit, I came into this kind of deliberately with a bit of a blank slate in my head of not knowing that much about Atalanta, and I probably won't be the only person who you've spoken to that doesn't know all that much about them. But what I'm keen to find out is why them? I think that's my first thing. Like, and not to slight them, they're a big Serie A institution, but like, why Atalanta? Of all the teams you could have picked, why did you end up choosing them?
So I first became aware of them when they were in the Europa League, which was 2017-18, and that was their first ever European season for 20 odd years. At the time, I didn't know that. I just saw them as an Italian team in Europe who I'd heard of. But if you told me that they'd finished in the top 6 for the past 10 years, I probably would have said, yeah, sure. The fact that they were struggling, they were fighting relegation 2 seasons before, and that they've won more. Them and Genoa are tied for the most Serie B titles in history because they spent that much time in Serie B. I would have had no idea about. But I was watching the Europa League because it was the year that Everton were in it, and they just saw Romelu Lukaku, and they brought in, it was the classic Klaassen, Sigurdsson, Rooney, Sandro Ramirez, Michael Keane year when they brought loads. So I was kind of just interested to see what that team was going to do, and they were playing against Atalanta. They weren't even playing in Atalanta Stadium. Atalanta Stadium was ineligible for UEFA competition because it didn't have numbered seating, so they had to play at Sassuolo Stadium, the Mapai Stadium, which is some 200 kilometres away. But again, I didn't know that at the time. It sounded like they were at a home match. Like the noise was deafening, and they absolutely pulped Everton. And not just, it wasn't a smash and grab. It was an absolute like masterclass. It was the individual players I'd never heard of, and I loved them immediately. And the way they were playing was aggressive, attacking football. It was fast. There was pressing across the pitch. It was so interesting. And there was this kind of old silver-haired manager on the touchline who I'd never even heard of before. And there was something about that and the enigma of it all that I was like, I like this. I like this story. And I just started to watch them more. Started to watch kind of analytics videos about them and read about them, and it was around that time that I think people like Football Daily and Tifo started to cotton on to what they were doing, because Atalanta finished fourth the season before in Gasperini's first year there, and they would have got Champions League football, but Serie A only had 3 spots open at the time,
right?
So they would have had Champions League. They were even higher than the Europa League. And they'd finished 15th the season before, and it was incredible. And it wasn't just this rags to riches story. It was the fact that they were playing some of the best attacking football in Europe.
Yeah.
And then in the 2 or 3 years that followed, that went higher and higher and higher, to the point where in 2019-20, this club who had the 14th highest wage bill in Serie A were 2 matches. With 2 or 3 matches left of the season, they could have won the title. They were 6 points behind Juventus, and if Juve had lost their last 2 and Atalanta had won their last 2, they would have won the league. And they would, in the process, they scored 98 goals, which is the most in Serie A since the 1950s. Like, this is unheard of from players that people had never even heard of before, and it wasn't like they'd had these players and then turned them over and brought the big boys in. They hadn't. They kept bringing these unheard of players, and this story just kept growing and growing and growing. And I just started to grow more and more attracted to this team, and I wrote about them. Then the pandemic happened, which hit Bergamo just terribly, and it happened in that amazing 2019-20 season, their greatest ever season, you can argue. The pandemic hit them halfway through, and Bergamo was absolutely devastated by it was where it all kicked off in Europe. It was the epicenter. It was those scenes in Italy of the armoured trucks going through the streets with bodies. That was in Bergamo. And that in itself brought this horrible kind of unfortunate kind of oxymoron, and that the fans didn't get to see half of that season was really tragic. And I just dug in deeper into the culture of this amazing city that people hadn't heard of, and it turned out the team very much mirrored the city. Like, an hour away from the 2 big Milan clubs, and Milan is obviously a huge tourist hotspot, but people had never even heard of Bergamo, and it's just down the road from it, and it's amazing. That, and it's just all these wrapped up stories. It was like I like hit on a pot of gold of all these different stuff, and pitched the idea to pitch, and it just so happened that they accepted my application on the day the Super League broke out, which in itself I thought was like this incredible kind of bit of slice of irony, in the sense that the day that football was about to eat itself and pull away was the day that I had a book pitch accepted about little old Atalanta. Like, it was just this nice kind of irony to it, I suppose. And just absolutely fallen in love with the club, the city, all of it, just ever since. And I probably always will be now as well.
Yeah, do you consider yourself like a honorary sort of Atalanta fan after finding things out about them?
Definitely, yeah. I have a Premier League team that I support, but there was something about this team and the way that it kind of went against the rich eating the rich nature of football at that time, particularly after the pandemic. There was something about this team, and it almost felt like going back to grassroots football, which is insane when you think that this team are playing in Europe. But that's how far the Premier League has gone, is that you start looking at Serie A teams as these little kind of almost like bottom feeders. Like, it's incredible. And I definitely consider myself a fan, and it feels like there's like a genuine, there's a kind of genuineness to it, and which is really I love. I've always loved Italian football in general, and to have an actual kind of a horse, a kind of horse in the race now makes it all the more enjoyable, I guess.
And that's the thing with Italian football, actually, because I So my book weirdly is on Milan, so it's gonna be, yeah. So it's gonna be on the Ancelotti team of 2003, 2007. So the one that lost in Istanbul and rose in Athens. But I would look at Milan, and I remember writing, and it's in the drafting stages of one of many hundreds of drafts, as you know, we'll have to go through. But I talk about sort of the beauty of Milan and sort of the dominance of Milan, but I forget that when there's dominance on one side, there tends to be a lot of upheaval and struggle on the other side. And I guess I know a little bit about Bergamo only from what I've seen on a Copper 90 documentary, and from a little bit of some of the players that have moved from, let's say, Brescia or Atalanta to Milan. Andrea Pirlo is obviously the biggest one. We know Baggio did the opposite route, and there's a couple of others who've done that since. I think Baresi Maldini started in Brescia, moved up to Milan as well. So is it fair to call Atlanta a kind of small club? Like, would you consider them a small club in Italy, or would you consider them a sleeping giant that deserves more than what they've been getting so far?
Oh, small club, 100%. This is a club that has one piece of silverware in its entire 115-year history. Mm-hmm. Like it's never had heights. It's never a brief kind of dalliance in the UEFA Cup in the early 90s. They've had some very kind of they've had a few well-known players like Claudio Caniggia, who's the winger for Argentina, played there. That was like probably his most renowned club spell, was probably with Atalanta. They call them the queen of the provincial clubs, because it was of the outside of the seven kind of sisters of Italian football, Atalanta were probably the biggest, I suppose, but I guess that was only just through history and through longevity. In terms of silverware, absolutely not. Like there was nothing in the way of that. They've run off a shoestring for years, just having this amazing academy that they can then flog to the Milan clubs. Going right back to the 1960s when Helenio Herrera made his amazing all-conquering Inter team, picking some of the Atalanta players back then, even though when Atalanta were, Serie B, lower Serie A sort of team. It's always been the way. These past 5-6 years since Gasperini came in are nothing but a dream for them. It's nothing. There's no sense of being back or being this is where we belong. It is like a nirvana. It's like this heady dream that they can't quite believe has happened. And so last season they finished 8th, and a lot of people have said, well, do you think is that the end of the Gasperini cycle, or is it a disappointing season? But I find it hard to call it disappointing, given that they were on the cusp of relegation before he came in, and they had no expectation to. It's not like they brought Gasperini in and put a structure around him that was like, okay, we're now going to challenge for Europe. Literally until, even when they're in the Champions League, the president would say at the start of every season, our aim is to not be relegated every single season. And I think that is just absolutely remarkable. And I think keeping that mindset is what has allowed the club to enjoy what it's had and not get down on itself. And ultimately, the longer, if they're still in and around in 5 years' time, then sure, your expectations shift a bit. But I think as long as Gasperini is there, even if they end up finishing 10th, 11th, as long as they play in the style that he's always had and they have these memories that he's brought with them, these will always be remembered as the golden years of this club, I think.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading it, mate. I have to say, because like I say, I know nothing about them. All I know is probably their ultras, which I think like most tend to know about their ultras. And I've got a question on them in the quickfire round, which we can get onto in a sec. And what I want to do in this is it's going to kind of be a range on some of the stuff we've talked about, as well as stuff that probably I haven't really put forward yet. But I'm keen to get your idea on all of them. So best to just get everything out of your mind for a second. See the first thing that comes to mind with this. So first question: if Atalanta were in the Premier League, where do you think they would finish?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. I'm gonna ask. I'm gonna ask for a clarification. Do you mean Atalanta right now, or Atalanta say at their peak within this period that I've written about?
At their peak. We'll do at their peak.
I think they could finish in the top 6.
Really?
I think. Yeah, it's over a season. It's difficult because on their day, Atalanta could beat anyone. Like they were seconds away from beating PSG and going to a Champions League semi-final in a match where they didn't play very well.
Yeah.
On their day, they will blitz. They will blitz anyone in that same season. They hit over 4 goals in something like 8 matches in a season. This is one of the best attacking teams we've seen in Europe. If you take away trophies and silverware and prejudice, I suppose, this is one of the best attacking teams we've seen in Europe. Their defence will always be an interesting point because they do concede a lot of goals. What I tried to write about in the book is that is a necessity. I think you don't get the attacking play without the defenders being a bit mental. Like prime example being Christian Romero. Like we see how amazing he is at Spurs. Everyone loves him at Spurs. At Atalanta, every centre back's like that. Like a bit mental, like big error in them, but it's absolutely brilliant on their day. It would certainly be interesting. I'd love to see how. I've always been interested to see how English audiences would react to Gasperini because he's a fascinating character. There's bits of Mourinho with him. He falls out with players all the time. He's a nasty bastard with the press. Like he just blacks out on them. Yeah. He's prickly. Opposition. Every single other club in Italy despises him. It's because of his personality. I'd be really interested to see how he got on in England. Alex Ferguson inquired about him becoming his number 2 in 2009. Really? He was, and with a view to him then potentially succeeding him when Ferguson made his first retirement. Gasperini was the guy that he kind of picked out, but Gasperini was at Genoa at the time, was building something. It would be really interesting to see where they come in the Premier League. I think they would I don't think there'd be any middle ground. I think they'd either potentially get relegated or they'd finish 5th or 6th. I don't think there's no kind of median there, I think.
Yeah, it's a team of extremes, isn't it? Like from what I do know about them, it is a team of extremes. But I didn't even know that about Gasperini, and I'm a United fan, so that's interesting. But what if Gasperini did take over Man United, and let's say he took over from 2012-13, where do you think United would be under him?
Honestly, I love Gasperini. I think he's the best Italian, I wouldn't say manager, but tactician to come out of Italy in the last decade. I don't think people respect him enough. However, I don't think he's a coach who would do well at a big club. So he had an experience with Inter Milan in 2011. He was their 8th choice, and he lasted 5 matches because he wanted to play. He's always wanted to play 3-4-3 and have a team built up of older players without any ego, that they will just do the dog work for whatever he wants them to do. Does that sound like Man United to you? Not exactly. No. Imagine this is the Inter team who they'd won the treble with Mourinho. Mourinho had left, and then they had a season with Rafa Benitez, which in itself was kind of damaging. They then brought this fiery, kind of older manager in who wants to play 3-4-3 but has Eto'o sold from underneath him. Schneider doesn't play in a 3-4-3. You've got their centre backs were Lucio Zanetti and Christian Kivu, old, slow, not able to play a high line and kind of play that high offside line that Gasperini wants to play. It was a disaster, and he ended up kind of playing a bit with a 4 at the back, but that's never been his way. So it was a disaster. He definitely should have been given more than 5 matches. That's insane. But he was given 5 matches and he was sacked brutally. And I feel like that sort of thing has probably harmed his chance of ever getting a big club again. And I think he's kind of all right with that. He's a project manager. He's someone who wants time. His 3 best spells have been in 2 with Genoa, where he's had about 5 years total, and Atalanta, where he's been there for nearly 6 years. Again, it just doesn't sound like Man United, and it would have been fascinating to see him at Man United. It would have been absolute to see him, whether he would have gone down demanded absolute dogs in midfield rather than luxury players. that was the summer David Moyes went after Thiago and Fabregas. Gasperini would not have been going after those guys. He'd have been going after workhorses. So,
well, I wish we have them now. To be fair, we could do with a couple of workhorses in that United midfield. But yeah, I love Fred. I'll say it right now. I actually adore that man. But wait, so when Gasperini when he was being touted with the job, who rejected who then? Did Gasperini reject the second in charge role at United when Fergie was still there?
It's kind of unknown. From what I gather, it was that Ferguson went over to watch Genoa, and this would have been the time when I think Carlos Queiroz would have left his role as the number 2.
Yeah, because he went to Real Madrid, didn't he?
Yeah, that would have been about that time, about 2009. And I believe there was some. I don't think it was a hard offer, but I believe some inquiries were made from Ferguson. But Gasperini was, whether he even saw them get to the table or whether they were just from the Man United side without actually putting the question forward, I'm not sure. But I mean, if you saw the way the Inter job went literally a year later, I don't think that would have. It probably wasn't right for him or for either party.
I mean, probably would have been better than Van Gaal, so I probably would have taken him after that. And final question, that sort of 2019-20 season for Atalanta, kind of the season of what could have been, as horrible. It's weird with success in it, like as a small club getting to where they have is technically a success, but they could have done something extraordinary, and they have, but again it could have been even bigger. So if they did win the Scudetto that year, would it have been the biggest story in Italian football history?
I think you'd be hard pressed to find another one. I think the natural similarity would be to link it to Leicester. Like I think that would be the natural, and like I say, these players were just players who were good, solid professionals at a lower Serie A team, or were kind of mercurial, brilliant on their day, but like Papu Gomez, perfect example. Before Gasperini arrived, he was this mercurial forward who on his day was unplayable, but he'd end the season with like 5 goals and 3 assists. So and he was about 28 at this point. So it's like, well, this is just what this guy is. Like he's just that kind of unreliable. Will never quite realise their potential. Gasperini comes in and he scores 16 goals and 7 assists in his first season, and over the next 5 years pretty much becomes the best attacking player in Italy. I think that's not even that outrageous statement to say. That sort of overachieving the odds with players like that. Martin Darun, for example, remembered for his year at Middlesbrough where he scored at the Etihad against Man City, which is insane. You think that Martin Darun doesn't ever score goals. He was a bedrock of this Atalanta team when they were in the Champions League against PSG. Like it's mental. It doesn't make any sense. And I think like it wouldn't have just been the fact they won it. It would have been the fact they'd scored nearly 100 goals in the process. It's just, that's looking at Jose Mourinho's Real Madrid. That's looking at Pep's City. These like that season. I think only Pep's City and actually no, it would have been. I think they scored more goals than Klopp's Liverpool in 2019-20. Like I think only PSG and Bayern scored more. Like this is not heard of. This is and the fact they finished third that season. They'd finished third the season before that, and then they also finished third the season after that. 3 consecutive third place finishes, with there was a bit of turnover. Like Papu Gomez left the season after, but there was no bringing of stars in. There was no kind of right. We're gonna swing our European weight now and attract a new breed of player. They were still taking players out of Belgium, out of Serie B, out of South America, and often taking players when they were 27, 28. Like that, it didn't change anything. It wasn't like consolidating their status. They just kept doing what they were doing and producing this amazing result. And you're right, if they'd won the Scudetto, that would have been, put it this way, I wouldn't be the first English person writing a book about Atalanta if they'd won the Scudetto. Someone would have done it by now. In a weird kind of way, I kind of quite like.
I was gonna say
Like it just makes it kind of keeps it more niche, and it's like it's almost like a if you know, you know sort of thing. It's like that awful phrase, like the streets never forget.
Yeah. Well, yeah, well, come July 18th, most of us will know. So, I mean, like I said, I'll be putting the links and everything in the book. But mate, thanks very much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure getting to, well, talking to you first. I think this is literally the first time we've spoken on the like off of Twitter or anything. But yeah, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing that. And yeah, when the book's out, I'll be sure to get it, let you know what I think, and I'll be probably putting it all over my LinkedIn and Twitter. So feel free to take a look at it there. But really appreciate your time, mate. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate it. And yeah, thank you for having me on.